before, so I hope it works.
I'm sure you'll figure it out. And while she's figuring it out, I can just briefly kind of also maybe introduce myself a bit more.
Yeah.
I've been a member from Understanding Glazes with Sue, the Facebook group, for a while now, and I've really enjoyed kind of also helping people out and learning a lot myself about glazes and underglazes. And I kind of realized that Sue lives not too far away from me. So it was nice to at some point get to meet her where she lives, as it's just a little ferry ride away. And we kind of got in touch and got both very interested with this Underglaze project. And I'm very excited to look into it more and learn a bit more about it and what are the factors that contribute to some of the problems that people find. And if we can come up with some recommendations and guidelines, that would be really, really awesome. So I thank you so much, Sue, for like starting this and being the driving force behind figuring this all out.
Yeah, no problem. I just love data and problem solving and ceramics. So
and I love research.
Yes. Okay, Facebook's working. So
awesome.
Yeah, so thank you all. Hopefully you have so if you are experiencing issues with your underglazes, hopefully you filled out our online survey, and I can just provide the link to do that. If you haven't done that yet, I'm just going to share the link for the survey in the chat. And so we're just collecting. We have 77 responses so far. So it's great to just get like information from lots of people. So let's see, the Google form. So just gonna share in the chat. So if you haven't filled out the survey yet, then just click that link and then you could do that afterwards. And so what I was going to do for this meeting, I was going to just share the results that we have so far. So I was going to share my screen, just talk about some trends that I'm seeing, and then we'll just open up a discussion. And so if you have something that you want to say, you can raise your little Zoom hand, and that just indicates to me that you would like to speak. So I just make sure that everyone that wants to talk has a chance to talk. And then again, if you can mute your microphones while other people are talking, just for background noise. And so I think I'm going to start by sharing my screen here of the summary of the survey. So share screen. And I didn't really introduce myself. So I'm Sue McLeod, and I live in Victoria, British Columbia, or close to Victoria. And I've also worked as a technician at a public pottery studio since 2015. So I haven't actually been experiencing underglaze issues myself, but people come to me with problems all the time, and I've just been noticing patterns. And so that's why I wanted to start this project, was because I was like, hearing the same problems from several different people from different parts of the world. And I was like, hey, it would be really great if we could maybe solve some of these problems, or at least try to figure some of them out. So can you guys see my screen here? Hopefully, yeah, okay. So this is the survey. So I've shared a link in the chat to this survey. So the first question asks what the issue that you've been experiencing with underglazes has been. And so the main issue, so 59% of people have been experiencing the issue where the underglaze or the glaze over top of the underglaze seems to be absorbed by the underglaze. And so I don't know if the underglaze is like eating the glaze, or if it's an application issue where the underglaze is preventing the glaze from actually sticking to the bisque. And so that's one thing that I'd love to chat with some of you here who are here with me today about, like whether, because you can apply your underglaze to wet or leather hard or bone dry clay or to bisque fired clay. And I've noticed, and we'll see in these results, that people are doing both. So some people are applying before bisque, and then a lot of people are applying after bisque. And it seems to be like that's not the answer to these issues. So we're getting the same issues whether it's applied before bisque or after bisque. But then some people have also mentioned that applying before bisque has helped with their issues. So I'll be curious to hear from you guys about what you have tried and what has been working best for you. So that was the main issue. So where the glaze is kind of seems to be absorbed by the underglaze, and you have like a rough surface rather than like a shiny glossy glaze over top of the underglaze. The next issue was both the glaze and the underglaze bubbled. So lots of bubbling or crawling, pulling away. So crawling is where a glaze kind of pulls away, revealing the clay body underneath. And so that is another issue. And then pinholes and blistering of the glaze over top of the underglaze. So those are the main problems people are having. And then also the orange peel texture of the glaze. So that one I'm really interested to hear about as well, because that could be an issue with the glaze. I mean, the glaze firing temperature or the glaze, I'm not sure like how the underglaze would be affecting like the outer surface layer of the glaze. So I would love to talk about that. And then which brands of underglazes were you using? So here we have our lovely pie chart. Amico Velvet was the winner. And so Ronald and I were discussing earlier that Amico Velvet, it stands out as having the most issues, but it's also the underglaze that most people are using. So, so the statistics kind of like, there's a pattern there. If more people are using Amico Velvet and more people are having issues, it doesn't necessarily mean that Amico Velvet is worse than any other underglaze. It's just that more people are using it. So we got Amico Velvet, then Speedball was number 2, then Spectrum, Pottery Supply House, and then Mako Fundamentals. So those are the 5 main ones that stand out. And then there are a bunch of other miscellaneous brands as well. And then this question, did you have issues with all colors of that brand or just certain colors? And so this seems like most people are noticing that the issues are with certain colors. So certain colors of that brand of underglaze seem to be more problematic than other colors, which leads me to believe that it has to do with the colorant. And so the colorants that are used to create the colors of underglazes, we have our main coloring oxides like copper and cobalt and iron and nickel and manganese, etc. And those colorants can also be fluxes, which mean that they bring down the melting temperature of the substance that they're in, or they can be refractory, which means that they increase the melting temperature. And so that could be coming into play with why certain colors might be more problematic than others. And the other thing with colorants is like, if they're off-gassing, creating bubbles in the glaze that are not healing over, that could be something as well. And then we've got a bunch of text information, and then the type of clay. Most people are using white clay. I don't think this really gives us a lot of definitive answers, but it's interesting to see 68% of people are experiencing issues on their white clay, and then buff, and then porcelain, speckled red. So I'd be curious if any of you have, if you use several different clay bodies and you notice that you only experience issues on one certain type of clay body, that would be something that I would love to hear about. And then what stage was the clay in when the underglaze was applied? And so we've got bisque fired. Most people are applying their underglaze to bisque fired clay, so after the bisque, and then leather hard, so and then bone dry, then wet clay. So these are pretty close. So it doesn't really stand out like, oh, all the issues are when people are applying it to bisque, and so then everyone should just apply it before bisque, and then that's going to solve all of our problems. So again, no clear answers, but a lot of good information. And then this question is, if your underglaze was applied to bisque fired clay, did you re-bisque before you applied your glaze? And so most people are applying, that are applying glaze to bisque are just then going on to glaze afterwards and not re-bisquing. And so let's see. 13% of people say that they applied to bisque and then they re-bisque after. So I'd be curious to know from you guys at what stage you're applying the underglaze and whether you're bisque firing again afterwards. And then some info about the glaze, but I think that's enough of this type of data. And then I also have so all of the form responses are in a spreadsheet here, which don't get overwhelmed because I'll explain, or I'll just talk about what I think is important to note. So I've color coded based on the brand of underglaze. So all of these pink ones here are Amico velvets. So quite a lot of issues with Amico velvet. These turquoise ones are people who were sharing that they're having successful results. And so if you're here and you haven't filled out this form, or if you are experiencing some success, I would love it if you would fill out the form to describe the conditions of when you get successful results, because that's, you know, looking at what causes the problems, looking at what leads to successful results is just as valuable of information. And so I have this sorted by according to what stage the clay was in. So we've got mostly, so bisque fired clay up here. So these are all just the Amico velvet results. So bisque fired clay and then leather hard clay. So it's kind of half and half. So we've got Amico velvet in pink, then we've got Mako fundamentals in blue. And then, oh, and I also wanted to point out with the Amico, so lots of people say certain colors seem more problematic. And so that seems to be like one of the patterns that most stands out to me is that the issues are with certain colors. So to solve the problem, you could just stick to the colors that don't give you any issues, but we also want to maybe come up with a way of using the colors. It's probably the colors that we like the most that are giving us the problems, right? Go ahead.
Would you mind if I interject a bit?
Yeah.
Because I'm looking at the same form with the data. If you organize this sheet according to whether you applied it to bisque fired or leather hard, or more specifically, if applied to bisque and then glazed directly, if you like the J column, if you sort according to that, there's one pattern that starts to emerge, and that the people that applied to bisque fired clay and applied glaze over it seem to have mostly issues with like the reds and oranges, where the people that have applied to leather hard and rebisqued it, or rebisqued their bisque fired, seem to complain more about colors of blue and turquoise and that kind of range. That's an interesting thing to maybe continue looking into later on.
Yeah, there's so many different ways you can organize all of the data. And so, yeah, that's really interesting to point out. Yeah, so which colors and then which firing method or like stage of application. Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm noticing here, Pottery Supply House, all the people who use Pottery Supply House applied underglaze to bisque, and then applied glaze directly. Most people just applied glaze directly, but most people were applying underglaze to bisque. So that would be interesting to talk to some people who are using Pottery Supply House. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and we can always bring it back up if you guys want to know something. Hi from Australia. Hamza says, I want to ask about crystalline glazes. Yeah, we're only talking about underglazes on this chat. So we can't really talk about too much about crystalline glazes unless you're using them in combination with underglazes. But you're welcome to post your questions to the Facebook group, Understanding Glazes with Sue, if you have questions about crystalline glazes. Okay. So I have a couple polls here. So for the people who are attending the Zoom meeting, I just want to take a quick reading of what brand of underglaze you guys are all using, and then what issues you're experiencing. So I'm going to put a poll up on the screen, and then if you could just put your responses in, and just so I can get an idea of which brands you guys are all using. And I'll just wait for that and make sure there's no one stuck in the waiting room. Okay, so we've got, most people have answered. One more second, and then I'm gonna end this poll. So we've got most people using Amico Velvet, a couple with Speedball, Mako, Spectrum. So nobody here is using Pottery Supply House, so that's okay. And then a couple people using other. Awesome, thank you for participating in that. And then I have one more poll to share. This is my first time doing Zoom polls too. So how do I, oh, there you go. That should show you all the results. I thought I did that already. Yeah, so that's who's joining us on the Zoom call. These are the results from that. So 42% of you guys are using Amico Velvet. And then, so I'll stop sharing that. And then here we go. And then what's the issue that you've been experiencing? So you can choose more than one. So I'm going to launch the poll again, a different poll. And so if you guys could let me know which issues you've been experiencing with your underglazes. And I'll just give you a couple moments to answer. And I'll just see, okay, we are live in the Facebook group. Awesome. So I'll just keep my eye on that. So if you are watching live on Facebook, feel free to type comments in if you have anything that you want to contribute to this conversation. Okay, last call to answer the poll, and then we're going to end the poll. And so here are the results. So most people that are here are experiencing pinholes or blisters. But yeah, we have a little bit of everything. Color burning out, shards flaking off, some other. So I'd be curious to hear from the others, what issues you guys are experiencing. Okay, so thank you all for humoring me in that. Okay, so we have a small group. So there is almost 60 people registered. Not so many people are here live. So I think we can just have an open discussion. We don't have to be too structured about it. If there were 100 people, I would want everyone to raise their hand and wait their turn. But if anybody has anything that they want to share about their experiences with underglazes, I would love to hear about what you've tried, like what your process is, the type of underglaze that you're using, what you've maybe tried to fix it. And if you have tried other different things, like different thicknesses of underglaze, if you notice that it works better when the underglaze is thin versus thick, that sort of thing. So if anyone wants to be the first to share, you can either raise your hand or just start talking. Lisa, I see that your hand is raised. Hi.
Hi.
Go for it.
I was gonna give up using underglazes because I have such a hard time. I use getting the dried underglazes from my pottery supply house, and it took me years before I figured out that it's not water you're supposed to add to it to make up the underglaze. And then I got a they call it an underglaze medium, and that worked a little bit. So it just took longer for everything to settle out. And then I decided I would make my own underglaze medium. I think Mako or somebody has a recipe somewhere that I found. So I made that. And it was better again. It was whatever. I mean, the particles would stay suspended longer and I was happy. And but still I had that problem where the specific color cobalt and one called egg yolk, and when they fire, I guess the clear glaze disappears over those colors, and they don't look, it doesn't look right all the time. So yeah, I was gonna give up on underglazes because I just can't afford to buy those little things of Mako and Spectrum and all the time. So
what brand were you using? Is
it's the name of the pottery supply house is Ulster Ceramics here in Ireland, and they, I guess, make their own powder. They make their own underglaze, and
okay, so you're buying dry powder, like the underglaze comes in a dry powder form, and then you were adding water to it to begin with.
Yeah.
And what was the issue that you were having when you added water?
Oh, it just settled right out.
Okay.
Constantly stirring and stirring. So like half my time was spent stirring up glazes,
Right.
underglazes.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
and they don't spread properly. They never went on properly.
Yeah.
Right.
So
now, and then you switched to like an underglaze medium. That's like a commercial product that comes like in a bottle or something.
Yeah. The same place makes their own underglaze medium, and it's
Okay.
all secret, so they wouldn't tell me what it is.
Yeah.
Well, I have some indication. I was reading up on that also yesterday, but you need like gum in your solution to make sure that it doesn't dry too quickly. And then I think Digital Fire with from Plainsman, they recommend like 50-50 water and food safe antifreeze.
Yeah, propylene glycol, the stuff we put in the vape stuff. And I did make it with those things eventually, and it was great. I really liked it, but the one problem I had with that was I couldn't mix the gum properly. So I had the gum in powder, and I tried to mix it, and there was bubbles all over the place, and it didn't blend with the water, so it was horrible.
Yeah,
but it was better than water.
And gum is like, it's really useful to keep it suspended and like be able to apply it and smear it really nicely.
Yeah.
But afterwards, the gum actually also prevents glaze from being applied over top of it.
Does it?
So this is sometimes where like rebisking it can burn off the gums and help with getting a proper application of the glaze over it.
Oh, okay. I would never have thought of rebisking it, but that might be the solution. Or maybe even just putting it on leather hard.
The thing is, underglazes are really quite intricate because they have both clay in them, so they can be applied and shrink together with the pot. They have fluxes in them to make sure that they're melted a little bit and stuck to the pot. But then if they're over fluxed and you bisque them, then they kind of flux over the surface, which again leads to not being able to apply the glaze properly.
Okay.
And then, but if you don't bisque it, then you can get problems because there's too much gum in there. So it's like there's so many balances to look out for, and it's varies per brand. And this is where I think we have a really exciting project here.
Yeah.
So Lisa, so were you applying this underglaze that you were mixing up? Were you applying it to bisque
Yes.
and then just glazing right over top?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then you were having the issue where the glaze. So I'm curious whether the underglaze is preventing the glaze from adhering to the pot, but were you saying it was just like the blue and the yellow that you're
Well,
having problems with?
I'm sure there are other colors, but the ones that are most notable to me are the egg yolk and the cobalt.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Did
Okay.
you check the specific gravity of all the different colors you mixed up?
Not the underglazes, no. I don't have enough of it, you know. I only make like less than 100 grams
Right.
of sometimes only 50 grams of powder, you know. So yeah, definitely not unless I can figure out another way to check specific gravity. But
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, like you could use a syringe if you have like a syringe with a wide opening. You can draw out like, you know, even 50 milliliters of underglaze, and then you weigh that on your scale, and you divide the grams by the milliliters.
that would be all of my underglaze, you know.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I have problems figuring out how much liquid to add as well to the, you know, so even the underglaze medium, when I first tried it, was so happy because it seemed like whatever, all the particles were suspended and finally I could paint like normal. And that went on for a while. It did last for a while, but after, I don't know, a week, maybe 3, and things started settling out again. And there it is, stirring and stirring and stirring and mixing again. So
Interesting. Well, I would be curious if you could try possibly, like, do you still have these underglazes?
yeah, I sent you pictures.
Okay, yeah. I would be curious if you could just try a test where you do one sample, like do 2 samples, do the same number of coats of underglaze. Maybe you could try like a thin and a thick coat, and then put one through another bisque firing, and then glaze both of them and put both of them into the same glaze firing, and then just see if there's a difference in the results between the exact same process of applying the underglaze, the same thickness, but one has been through another bisque firing and the other one hasn't, and then see if you get any different results.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to try that.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd love to hear about your results.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool, thank you. There's a so Michaela says, Lisa, I have the same problem specifically with the Amico Velvet mint green and turquoise pre-mixed. I applied to bisque, let it dry 12 hours before glazing the pot with a clear glossy glaze. All other colors from the same brand are okay. My clay is a white earthenware that I need to bisque at 1100 Celsius for my glaze not to blister. Glaze fired at 1130 Celsius. Sorry, my microphone is not working. No problem. So yeah, that's another issue where it's the certain colors of Amico Velvet are having issues. And so the clay is a white earthenware that I need to bisque Okay. Interesting. Yeah, so that's so I would be interested, Michaela, if you have tried rebisking. So for all of you that either that apply the underglaze to bisque, do a test where you just put a sample into your next bisque firing and then try glazing over top and then see if that helps. Because I know that some people who apply the underglaze to leather hard and then just put it through a bisque firing, they're also having problems. So I don't know, but that could be the answer for certain types of underglaze. I'm not sure, but I would love, yeah, so if some of you could try that as a test and then let me know. The main problem is the glaze is not glossy on the spots and blisters a bit. Yeah.
I wonder if this is a slightly different issue actually, because it's with the green color, which I'm gonna guess is probably from a copper carbonate. And with the blistering, it kind of sounds like off-gassing, but it's also a bit low for that. But
Yeah. Like low temperature.
yeah, it's a
Mhm.
bit low for off-gassing of well, the carbonate is going to gas off at some point, and if it's a low fire clear, I'm gonna guess it melts quite early, so it's gonna
Right.
get kind of iffy on that.
Yeah, so if the clear glaze starts melting before the copper is off gassing, then you're getting the bubbles in the clear glaze, and then that can lead to the blistering. It would be
Yeah,
great to know the composition.
it would be. Well, and this I think is actually kind of the challenge of the whole research project, because we're dealing with all these commercial underglazes and we have no idea what's in them. We can kind of have a guess. We know what constitutes an underglaze, and depending on how they formulate it, we're going to find different issues.
Totally.
So before the meeting, Sue and I kind of talked already. It's like, maybe some of the issues are going to be resolved by saying just don't use this color from that brand because it has an issue in how they formulated it.
Problem solved.
Which is a really unfortunate recommendation in a way, but yeah.
Yeah, because we were talking about how, certain colorants act as fluxes and others act as refractory. But if the underglaze base is exactly the same, then the underglazes are going to behave quite differently. And so if we were the commercial underglaze company, we might develop a different base for the different colorants. So a base that melts at a higher temperature for the colorants that act as fluxes, and then a base like an underglaze base that melts at a lower temperature for the refractory colorants. But that's a lot of work and a lot of extra fine details to take care of. And so, yeah, that would have to be something like, the little people like us could try and
Yeah.
maybe not the big commercial companies.
Well, there is something to be said to formulating your own underglazes, which actually sounds more daunting than it is, but it definitely is an option.
Yeah. Oh, I've tried it. And the issues that I've experienced the most were just like the shrinking of the underglaze. And so creating an underglaze that is good for both, leather hard and bone dry, or wet, from wet to bone dry or something. Like it seems like the composition of the underglaze is like, it was hard to make it for a wide range of dryness. And so if you're applying it to, it might work great on leather hard, but then bone dry, you're getting cracking where the underglaze is cracking because the clay has already shrunk, but then the underglaze is still shrinking after it's been applied. And so then you get little cracks forming and sometimes it falls off. And yeah, so I've tried, I think it's Vince Patalka has an underglaze base recipe, and then it does use propylene glycol and CMC gum like as the medium, and it's mixed with a bit of water as well, and that's for like the brushability. And but I was trying to create an underglaze that would work for the community studio, and then we just ended up like the amount of time that I was putting into creating like a foolproof underglaze, we just ended up buying a bunch of commercial underglazes and they just seem to work better. It was cheaper, but it was fun for me at the time. I see Andrea has her hand up, so I want to give Andrea a chance to talk to us.
Hi.
Hi.
So when I did this test, I was bisking cone 05 and firing cone 5. And so what I did is so I was working exclusively with the spectrum glazes. So not all of them did I test, but I tested about 20 different spectrum underglazes.
Okay.
And what I found, I did exactly what you were kind of suggesting, is I had a single test tile and I applied the underglaze at leather hard on 1/2 and bisked it, and then applied the underglaze on the other half after bisque.
Okay.
And then I applied the glaze immediately after in the single bisking. And what I found is that the clear glaze pooled virtually on 100% of the test tiles if I had applied the underglaze on bisque. Whereas if it was applied on the greenware, then it didn't pool at all. So then I kind of took it a next step and then ran it again with rebisking in between. And that also fixed the problem. So for me, as a general practice, I always rebisque when I apply underglaze, because the glaze seems to absorb to the surface more predictably than if I apply it it's almost like the underglaze creates a barrier to the clay body that kind of prevents the glaze from properly absorbing into it. So it's very evident on a clear glaze because you can see the clouding.
Yeah. And were you saying the glaze was pooling?
Well, it would cloud in areas, right? So,
Okay.
so it kind of looked like it was pooling, but it would cloud, and like it would have areas where it would be clear, and then it would have areas where it was cloudy.
Oh, I see.
That's
Okay.
interesting.
So, the other thing that I know on the test that I did, the only one that really created a problem was the orange for spectrum, and that one crawled. And I don't remember which application it crawled on, or if it crawled on both, but it really crawled.
And was this on low fire?
No, cone 5.
Cone 5, sorry. Okay, yeah.
And did the glaze crawl and expose the underglaze, or did both the glaze and the underglaze kind of crawl?
Yeah, it pulled right off the clay. Like it just pulled.
Underglaze.
The underglaze and the glaze both crawled together.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then that was but you aren't sure if that was where you rebisqued, or
I mean, the tile, what I don't remember, and I can't find the tile right now, is if it occurred on both sides of that tile or if it only occurred on one side. But I seem to recall that the entire tile was messed up. So
yeah, that's interesting.
But that was the only color out of there that did that. But the other ones were almost all consistent with their clouding.
I'm very curious, in the application of the glaze, could you see a visible difference in how it covered the underglaze between the bisqued and non-bisqued underglaze?
Yeah, it was much thicker. So where I applied the underglaze after bisque and glazed immediately after, that was a thicker, like it had a visible, by about 1 millimeter, you could see the difference in sort of glaze. It's like the glaze was sitting on top of the clay, whereas the other one obviously it absorbed much more into the clay. Because they were glazed at the same time, right? I would dip I only applied the underglazes at different times, and then the glaze just went in as a single dip, but half of the tile had a thicker sort of raised application of glaze than the other half.
And was there also like a visible difference in the application of the underglaze itself?
No. Well, I don't know what you mean.
Well, I can imagine sort of like when you're applying underglaze to leather hard, especially because the clay is still a bit wet, it's not going to apply as thickly. Then
Sure. I mean, I was aiming for uniformity, so it doesn't, I can't say that it was, I did it so long ago, like this was in 2015, that I don't really remember like how many coats of underglaze. I mean, I probably was pretty, I'm a little bit on the particular side, so I probably was very deliberate in how many coats of underglaze I did for each tile, and masking taped it off and whatever.
Yeah.
So unfortunately I don't recall that detail at this point.
I think actually one thing about like Sue, your suggestion also for Lisa, I think it's a really, really great test because you're applying the underglaze to bisqueware and the other one also to bisqueware. And so there's no difference in what you're applying it to. And it just makes sure that there's not a difference without having to necessarily like try to not make a difference. So I think it's really important to have that, to keep as many factors the same. So the wetness or the state of the clay.
Yeah, I've just since
one.
then I've adopted a practice of always rebisking if I apply underglaze, and I have more successes than failures as a result of that. However, I do still, and I haven't quite determined if it's my glaze thickness or if it's the actual underglaze that's creating the problem, but I do, and it's only because of this actual sort of Zoom meeting and communication that I'm kind of, it's triggering another consideration, because I have been running into a lot of pinholing and blistering on certain pieces, and now I'm kind of thinking that they are historically I haven't had the problem. It's sort of more recent in the past year, maybe year and a half, but now I'm thinking, well, maybe they changed the formulations a little bit of the underglazes, but
Definitely.
or I'm not mixing the underglaze properly or something. Because I am seeing that on pieces where I have underglazed, even though I've bisted, I am getting some bubbling on multiple clay bodies. So it's not just on, one type of clay body. So that is, underglazes are kind of the bane of my existence right now.
And you did you did mention that basically the rebisking solved most of the issues except for the orange that peeled off, right?
Yeah, and I've never used it since.
Yeah, because that kind of indicates almost like a different issue, because it sounds almost like an underglaze to clay bond issue.
Yeah, it's certainly.
Could be solved by applying it not on leather hard, but on bone dry?
Well, and it could also be that maybe that test tile had some oils on it or something, like, finger or something that I hadn't accounted for. So I've never run the test again. So, it's worth revisiting. The other thing I want to comment on is as far as formulations, like it would be, I think because of the data you're collecting, like if you can get it down to like particular glazes from particular underglazes from particular manufacturers are experiencing a problem. And you can sort of identify a pattern with that. I think it's reasonable. You could probably reach out to the manufacturer and say, hey, what's in this glaze that could be causing that? Because, we're seeing a collective response of this.
Yeah.
Because I'm also considering that, it might be bisking temperature that is actually the culprit, or something else that's kind of, and right now everybody's, some people bisque to 04, some to 05, some to 06. So that also probably plays a part in what your glaze is going to do on top of a underglaze.
Yeah, totally. And so we do have that information. It's like so much data to kind of like put together and see the patterns. But so I'll be looking at what the bisque temperatures are, and because if you're bisquing to a lower temperature, your bisque is going to have more open pores, which is going to possibly absorb the underglaze if you're applying the underglaze to bisque, and then also, or if you're applying the underglaze before bisque and then you're bisquing to a low temperature versus a higher temperature, and then like how that reacts with the glaze afterwards. So that's a factor. But yeah, definitely like applying underglaze to leather hard versus bisque, you're probably going to get a thicker, with the same application method, you're probably going to get a thicker coat of underglaze on the bisque versus the leather hard, just because of absorbency of the bisque.
Yeah, I found that, I mean, I personally didn't stop applying at leather hard, or at leather hard, because I found that the colors were not as for me, at least with the spectrum ones, I got more muted colors if I was applying it earlier in the process.
Right.
I think exactly what also Sue's talking about, that like when the clay is leather hard, it still has some moisture in it. And it doesn't suck up as much of the underglaze. So you actually get a thinner coat with the same application method. So once you wait to bone dry with the same application method, you're going to actually get a slightly thicker coat with more vibrant colors.
Right. Yeah. And I haven't done, I kind of abandoned it very early and just went to bisque. But and the other thing I wanted to kind of point out is, I think for every manufacturer, they have to issue an MSDS for each underglaze, which will probably reveal at least some of the, maybe not the quantity of ingredient.
Yeah,
I think it has to really reveal it has to reveal at least what's in it. So there may be some patterns there as far as kind of base ingredients or
I've been going over those, and it just says basically what the main ingredients are, but those are, it really is about the balance between those ingredients that causes the issues.
Anyway, that's all I have to share.
Thank you so much. That's really
Thank
interesting. Yeah, if you do any more testing, like if you're inspired to do some more testing, please let me know the results of that. Fern has her hand up, so I'd love to give Fern a chance to talk to us. And I just wanted to answer, Kayla had a question. Can you use the same clay as your clay body to create underglaze plus a medium to avoid shrinkage? And I was just going to say, like, shrinkage generally has to do with the water content. And so like, you could have the clay body that, the particles have the same sort of shrinkage, but if the water content doesn't match, that's where you then that's where shrinkage. So like really wet slip is going to shrink a lot more than leather hard clay that has already shrunk a little bit. And so I think water content, so using less water and more medium, whatever this underglaze medium, that could be like a way to prevent high shrinkage.
Yeah, the gum in the with the clay does actually allow some flexibility in that shrinkage. But other than the clay body, you also need a bit of that flux, a bit of frit in that underglaze formulation to get it to melt properly, to also get the good color response.
Right.
So just the clay body with colorants, it can work, but then you're really talking more about a colored slip or envelope.
Totally. All right, Fern, you have the floor.
I'm still in the middle of experimenting, so maybe it's premature. I do sgraffito, and I also do like more three-dimensional additions on my pieces. So I've been putting the underglaze onto the leather hard. And I have to switch. I was using the Amico Velvet White, and I couldn't get it quick, so I changed over to Speedball, which is available, and I covered the whole body in white because I'm using these paper clays. I used to use Laguna, but now what we have, I used to use Pottery Supply, and now I have a Laguna, which I haven't used before. And I found I covered the whole thing in white and added my stuff to it on the, so I added the white to the leather, and then it bisqued fine. And then I put the colors on top of it, and there's three-dimensional stuff with a clear glaze, and it came out really off gas. There's like real bubbles and some flaking of the white. And I did that before on And so that's a 06 firing for
Okay.
the bisque and a 6 for the glaze. And
Okay.
I've done that before with the other clay, with the Pottery Supply clay, and I didn't have that problem. But I don't know if the bisque, the first bisque was an 05 or an 06. Do you think the problem is with the off-gassing from the clay, because it's a paper clay and it has a lot of paper, stuff burning out? Or do you think that it's with the underglaze? Because I never really thought of a double bisque. So I'm going to try the one I have in there now, halfway through, with a double bisque before I glaze it.
Yeah.
So do you think the problem's with the clay or with the glaze, underglaze?
So the blistering is happening in the glaze. So you're applying the underglaze, then you're bisque firing, then you're
beautiful,
and it's great.
Yeah.
And then you're so in the bisque firing, any of the paper from the paper clay that should be burning out during the bisque firing, I would.
Right.
And then you're applying glaze, and then you're getting blistering in the glaze at a cone 6 glaze firing.
Yeah, and some parts actually, it looked like it bubbled out, like with holes.
Yeah.
And there was one spot, actually a whole piece came off.
Okay.
Lifted right off the clay.
And it was basically underglaze lifting off the clay.
Yeah.
Right.
But it was covered with the clear.
Okay. Interesting.
Can I ask which clear glaze you in
that case, I actually used the Amico mixing clear, which is their Celadon mixing clear, instead of the Studio Glaze.
Okay, so I'm curious, how long after glazing do you think your piece went into the kiln?
I'm not sure in this case.
Okay, because I have noticed that if the bisque is still wet at the point that the temperature, so sometimes people, like at the community studio, it happens all the time, like people are glazing like right as we're loading the kiln, and we load the pots that are like wet, the glaze is dry on the outside, but the bisque is damp still inside. And sometimes if the water that's in the bisque turns to steam before it has a chance to evaporate, then the pressure from the steam escaping the bisque can like blow out the glaze. And so sometimes I've noticed, like especially if the glaze is quite thick, and then the pot goes in before, like, if it's still cool to the touch, like, when you're loading a bisque, you want to make sure that your pots are all bone dry. If they're cool to the touch, then you should leave them out of the bisque or like program a candling period. So I always ask when there's like these blowouts, or it looks like an explosion kind of happens through the glaze, and especially the underglaze that has already been bisque fired and is already adhered to the clay is like actually being affected and is being removed from the clay. It seems like there's some pressure coming from the clay pushing out against the underglaze. And so my first instinct is water turning to steam. But if you're not sure, that would be something to like pay attention to. If your pots still feel cool to the touch as you're loading them into the glaze firing, and then you have some issues with crawling or blistering, or like these blowouts, where there's like a hole in the glaze and then you can see the clay body through, that could be one of the reasons why.
I also noticed Tony Hansen on Digital Fire did some tests, and actually it was the Amico Celadon that did not come out at least very well on their underglazes, and actually caused a lot of clouding and slight bubbling of the glaze. I don't think it's necessarily what you were talking about, but it may just be like another layer of contributing factors. Because my main instinct is together with Sue, actually.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go back, like, I just finally did the specific gravity for our studio underglaze, which I had mixed up to be painted on. And it was so high, I couldn't believe it, because the last tests I did, it was like, I did it with some kids and it was so milky. And I thought, uh-oh, and it was like 10, it was like, what, 150 or something like that instead of 100 or 140. Because you recommend 140 for the clear, right?
Well, for our clear, that's where we keep it
Yeah.
to avoid clouding. Yeah. It
Yeah.
could be different for different glazes, but
So
yeah.
I'm gonna go back to the studio glaze, underglaze now and see how that works now that I just fixed it. So I keep my eye on it now because I've read all through your little diagram with all the little squiggles. It's fantastic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think I know with the cloudy clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. How to avoid cloudy clears. Yeah.
That's a really good explanation.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. And then, so did you fill out the survey?
I did. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you upload any photos of your issue? I'm just curious. Like,
I do have photos of it. I actually posted it and somebody answered me on your blog and said, try bisquing it at a higher temperature. But then the guy that runs the kilns in our studio, which I'm a partner in actually, he was really reluctant to take it up to like a cone 04. And he did 2 big giant hunks of this particular paper clay in 2 bit, like he bisqued it twice and he weighed it and there was absolutely 0 difference in weight. And he said, bisquing at a higher temperature is not going to solve that problem. Do you agree?
Well, bisquing is going to do at a higher temperature, as Sue also explained early. Like it's going to start vitrifying a bit more, so you get less porosity. So what it actually does is it gets usually a slightly thinner glaze coat. And
but it
thinner glaze coat can help.
But all the gas should be out at, if there's no change in temperature, all the moisture should be out of it.
Yeah.
There's no change in weight between the 2 bisques.
No, the changes are mostly due to porosity. There's not much that gets burned off between 06 and 04.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it just becomes denser. The clay becomes more dense the higher the bisque temperature, but it should weigh the same. It's just those pores start to close up the higher the temperature goes. And then with a smaller pore network, like tinier pores, then it's less absorbent for if you're applying underglaze to bisque or for glazing your bisque. And so that's the difference between like an 06 and an 04. And I never really recommend changing your bisque temperature unless it's like trying to solve a problem across the board where everyone's having the same problem. You're all using the same, like, especially in a community studio, if it's like one clay body and you're trying to solve an issue with this one clay body, then you might want to alter the bisque temperature. But changing the bisque temperature just for like one style, of creation, that could lead to problems with other glazes and the application of like all the other glazes and all the other things people are doing in the studio. So I don't actually recommend messing with the bisque temperature unless it's like a studio-wide problem that you're trying to solve by either creating a more porous or a less absorbent bisque.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
We actually had in one of our studios the exact same issue where somebody decided to change the bisque temperature to solve an issue with one glaze, which solves the issue for the one glaze and caused issues for every other glaze, because all of a sudden the application was just different for all the glazes.
Yeah.
And in the end, we solved it by just using specific gravity and flocculating and deflocculating to fix the one glaze to get a better coat that's a little thinner.
Yeah. Yeah, so you could just change the specific gravity. You could change your application method, But yeah, changing the bisque temperature, yeah, affects everything in the bisque. And so, yeah, it could snowball into more problems. You know, yeah, you solve the initial problem and then you create a whole bunch of other problems that you have to solve.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Michaela
welcome.
says there's an interesting article on Digital Fire about the way too low specific gravity of commercial underglazes, 1.26 for Amoco instead of their recommended 1.4. So if the specific gravity of your underglaze is low, then that means there's extra water or extra liquid. And so depending on what the issues they're describing in this article, yeah, if Amoco publishes a recommended specific gravity for their underglazes, then that's awesome. And I would definitely be measuring specific gravity to make sure that it's within their recommendations. Yeah, because too much water. So I've also, we ordered a bunch of underglazes, and so we ordered 10 different colors, and one of the underglazes, like in the bottle, so there are these chrysanthos underglazes, which I've never had a problem with, just saying. I don't use underglazes very much, but I do a little bit of screen printing, and so I haven't really had any issues with this brand of underglaze. But so the one color came and the underglaze was completely dry in the bottle. Like it was just like sludge, like it was barely wet. And so we added water to it and mixed it up. And then we started using it and the underglaze totally cracked. And so we realized that there was too much water. We had added too much water to the underglaze, which led to too much shrinkage. And so the underglaze was cracking, sometimes not before or sometimes not like during the bisque firing, but then it would come out of the glaze firing and it would have all these little cracks like under the coat of clear glaze that you would notice. And so we just ended up, I noticed there was like a layer of water on the top, like as it settled out, and I just removed all the excess water and then mixed it up, and then it's been working pretty good ever since. And so it is possible to add too much water to your commercial underglaze, which could then lead to shrinkage issues and adhesion issues. And so I was curious if anyone in here was like experiencing the underglaze kind of flaking off, like where it's like peeling off during the glaze firing and you're getting like shards. And so that could be an adhesion issue due to too much water in the underglaze. Okay, so we're at 2 o'clock. If anyone else has something that they want to say, we just heard from a few people today. Thank you all for joining us for this chat. It was a lot of fun. And it's always good to have these face-to-face conversations with people because I spend a lot of time alone in my office and in my studio. And so, yeah, I love talking to you guys. But yeah, if anyone has any last minute points that they want to make, feel free to raise your hand or just chime on in right now.
I have one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So one thing I noticed with the spectrum glazes is depending on what, and I don't know if it's just a quality assurance thing, but I find that some bottles are like 3/4 full when other bottles are like fully full. And so I think at one point I had sort of had a verbal meltdown with the manufacturer to say what's going on here. And they advised me that it went by weight, and it would make sense that some underglazes would weigh more than others. But I'm just curious if with other brands, like, do you always get a full bottle regardless of what color you're ordering? I've
never noticed a difference. I think
like I've had bottles that were like only 3/4, like 25% empty.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that one underglaze I was just talking about with that was all dried up.
Yeah.
Like that one was less than full. But then like, it's like the water had, I don't know how long it had been sitting on the shelf, but the water had all evaporated. And so
Yeah,
then,
and what they told me was to add water, but I was like, you know what, I shouldn't be adding water to a brand new bottle of Underglaze. Like it should be sealed that it's not
right.
drying out, right? So anyway,
Yeah.
How long it has to sit around for water to actually evaporate? Because water does evaporate even if it's sealed.
yeah, but I mean, it's, you know, it's coming from Green, which is pretty much the only pottery supply place around here. So their turnover, I imagine, is pretty reasonable as far as product in and out.
Did you say Green Barn?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, we have the same water supply house.
yeah, yeah. So, you know, they supply stuff. So anyway, that was my only, I was just curious if with other brands you would see sort of on new bottles variations in the actual quantity that's in the bottle based on the weight of the item, you know, the components of it, the ingredients of it versus the actual volume of the container.
Yeah, I mean, if the underglaze companies were composing their underglazes differently for the different colors, like we were talking about earlier, then maybe I would expect like there might be some materials might be heavier and more dense, and so therefore take up less space. But I mean, no, I would assume like a bottle of underglaze should be full to the top, like that there wouldn't be a huge difference.
And I read a little quote from Digital Fire, and I write up on Underglazes, because Tony Hansen's writing about the specific gravities on two commercial underglazes, and he writes Amico and Chrysanthos have a specific gravity of 1.26 and 1.22, which is 67.5% water and 68% water. And especially the former is well below their recommended specific gravity of 1.4. So if you're actually thinking about how full that bottle is, it is almost 70% water. So what we're buying is almost 70% water. So yeah.
Evaporation.
You know, I had that same trouble with Amico with the velvets. I got some that were like, I thought half full, and then I got a green that was so watery, I couldn't even use it. So I actually complained. I was buying it from somewhere in Ontario, even though I'm in BC also. And actually the retail people gave me a credit.
Yeah. No, and I must admit, sometimes I do suspect, but here I'm going totally conspiracy, but this is not my group. I'm allowed to do that. But sometimes I have the feeling they just add water to sell us more. And we also, I think, had batches of clay that were so soft, you couldn't work with them, but we're just buying more water instead of clay.
Yes.
They do that with chicken, so why wouldn't they do it with pottery supplies?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, just add a little more water. Water's
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. I think we can buy full bottles, but then it's going to be so liquidy that we're just going to have to dry them out ourselves.
Yeah.
So Lisa doesn't have that problem because she's buying the dry underglaze powder, and so there's no water, so she's adding the water herself. So she's just paying for the product.
That is nice.
Yeah,
Definitely
as
nice.
long as it works out and you're not
Yes,
having
that's the other downside.
they need to provide specific instructions for like you weigh out this much underglaze powder and then you add exactly this many milliliters of water. Like that should be, if they're selling it that way, then they should be providing very specific instructions.
Sue, do you by any chance know if the evaporation of water for underglaze is going to be the same as the propylene glycol?
Oh, no, I have no idea what, like, yeah, I've never really looked into rate
No,
of
me neither. I just thought of it. I'm like, like, is it just the water that evaporates, or is it both of them? Which one should we add? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, because like propylene glycol, yeah, I don't know. It seems like that would not evaporate as fast as water, just like based on how it feels. I don't know. I honestly have no idea. Like it's just a thicker substance, like where alcohol, alcohol evaporates quite quickly and it's much thinner than water. And so Yeah, no, I that's a good point.
Well, my 3-second Google search says propylene glycol does not evaporate to any significant degree at room temperature, with a boiling point of 370 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ah, there you go. My instincts were correct.
So we have to just add water, not more brushing medium if it got thicker over time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because water is the only thing that could be evaporating. So you're not having to replace any of the mediums that are in there. Water is the only thing that could be possibly leaving the underglaze.
So I think, Lisa, for you, this might be kind of relevant, because if you mix up your own underglazes and you have the dry powder and you add the medium to it, you're going to end up with a good underglaze. But if it gets thicker over time, it just means it's just the water that's leaving. So don't thin it out with more medium, because you're just adding more antifreeze and more gum solution. So just thin it down with more water, because that's the only thing that actually left.
Yeah. Agreed. David says this has been great. I've heard some super details that are like crumbs or clues that I can relate to my situation. Yes, David, please let us know if you solve any of your problems based on what we've been talking about today. And Michaela asks, has someone got a base recipe for underglazes for people to explore and tweak for their needs that they are happy to share? So I could share, I was using Vince Patelka's Underglaze base recipe. And so that was really good. This is, oh, there we go. Perfect. So Ronald just shared in the chat. Which is that, are those both Underglaze recipes that you shared?
It's an underglaze recipe from Vince Patelka that was published on Glaze. It
Oh.
has a really nice write-up with everything in there and the link to the PDF to Vince Patelka's website.
Ah, perfect. Yeah. So he's a
So there's-
valuable source of information. Check out his website because he just shares everything. So yeah, he's a very good resource.
Only
Okay, well, this has been great fun. Thank you all for joining us here today. And maybe we'll do another one. I'm hoping to get, so we have 77 responses. I'm hoping to reach 100. That's my goal. So I'm gonna publish this video on my blog and on YouTube, and then hopefully it'll encourage more people to fill out the survey. And then we'll see what, yeah, like if you guys, and anybody watching this in the future, if you try any of the things that we've suggested, do like some really controlled experiments, make sure that like keep track of how many coats you're applying, make sure everything is really well mixed before you apply it. And then, you know, comparing like to like. So if you're applying to bisque, you know, you could apply to leather hard, and then rebisque, and then not rebisque, and then you could apply to bisque, and then not rebisque, and then rebisque one sample. And so so many, like I wish I had all of the different brands of underglazes, because I would just do all of these tests myself, but it would be really expensive for me to just like acquire all of the, you know, all of the things that I need to do all of this testing. But I would love it if you know, if we could collaboratively yeah, try some experiments. And if you want any advice on like how you do your test, then please either email me or post into the Facebook group, and I'd be happy to like help you design a test that's going to give good information.
Yeah, and designing tests it's an art to make sure that, because there's like I started doing a PhD also, which is not necessarily ceramics, but designing a good test is an art in itself. There's so many little things that we kind of forget about, like, oh, that actually does contribute. So also for tests, like feel free to ask for feedback from people and see what they can come up with about keeping things consistent. And I think feedback is just really valuable for this stuff. This is why like I'm now working with Soup, because it just helps to be able to feedback off each other to kind of think about these things. And this is where also I think this meeting was really fun, to get the feedback from Andrea and from Lisa and Fern, their experiences, to like, oh yeah, we have to make sure to think about those things. And
Yeah, I
oh,
agree.
sorry, I got really excited. Thank you so much, everyone.
And David asked if I'm going to publish the spreadsheets, and yes, I absolutely will be publishing all of this information. Yeah, so that's coming. So if you guys, if any of you are, I think most of you are on my email list, but if you're not, just go to my website, suemcleodceramics.com, and then any place that you can enter your email address to download a PDF or something, then that'll put you on my newsletter, and then I'll be sharing all of the data and the spreadsheet and everything. Yeah, so we'll keep in touch. So I hope you all have a very good weekend and enjoy the rest of your summer, and we'll reconvene sometime soon. Okay. Bye-bye. Now we have the
Everyone.
awkward Zoom goodbye. Awesome. Thank you all. And stop recording.